The date is April 14, 1912, from Southampton, England to New York and New York City, USA. Passenger liner RMS Titanic.
Providing a home for your little ones can feel overwhelming. Progressive created.
What do you see? Iceberg right ahead. Hard to starboard, please.
And rings the warning bell 3 times. He phones the bridge with Officer Moody answering the call.
Hello?
Fuck, go back!
Inside.
Hard a port.
First officer. Captain Smith arrives on the bridge just after Officer Boxall, making fire as the boat they had struck, and Officer Murdoch tells him of the encounter with the iceberg.
Close the freaking doors!
Bridge wing to inspect damage. Shortly after, Officer Boxall departed quickly for a tour of the bow. Down below inside Titanic, the water began to pour into 6 watertight compartments, most noticeably into Boiler Room 6. The seam into Boiler Room 6 was open 2 feet above the floor.
What
Came
happened?
in with the strength of a fire
What do we
hose.
hit?
Boiler Room
We hit an
5 was also
iceberg. I
compromised.
tried to turn away, but it was too
controlled for the
late.
time being
She's
by
hit
closing
it.
off the doors to the coal bunker where the water was coming in. Lookout George Hogg, who had been off duty at the time of the collision, ran up to the forward well deck to have a look around after hearing the noise. He didn't see anything out of place at the moment, so he returned back inside the ship. Joseph Scarrett had been smoking nearby and also ran to the forward well deck with a group of fellow crewmen. This group found a large quantity of ice and snow on the starboard side. Not thinking too much of the situation, they departed back inside while cursing the iceberg for disturbing their peace. The bridge telegrams, and Titanic began to move forward slowly in the ocean once again.
Kate Kelly was my aunt. She was in bed when somebody woke her up and said the Titanic is sinking. She thought they were teasing her. But then somebody else came and they said, oh yeah, you've got to get out.
When Titanic hit the iceberg, the Adergool 14 were in different parts of the ship. Some were in their cabins, others were at a party. The impact wasn't felt by everyone. In fact, the shudder was so slight that many people on the ship didn't even feel it. So everyone was calm and orderly. Nobody thought the ship was in any danger.
And conversed with him for a short while before they both returned to their cabins afterwards.
Grandma had said she recalls at first that people were on deck picking up chunks of ice that had scraped off from the iceberg, putting it in their drinks because it seems there were many parties and celebrations going on at that hour of the night. And most likely she probably considered there was no danger.
In the engine room, trimmer Patrick Dillon observed the engine starting to go ahead slowly. Passengers up on deck and inside the ship began to comment that they noticed that the engines were not vibrating at the full speed that they had grown accustomed to during their voyage. For many on the ship, the collision, this alteration in the
Fleet believed the ship had merely scraped against the iceberg. Many of the passengers also thought the collision was insignificant.
Some people barely felt it. Some explained it as sort of a glancing blow, a shudder, but not something that moved them across the ship.
When you get injured in a car wreck, you're going to have to deal with a
Approximately 5 minutes after the collision, Captain Smith entered the bridge and noted a 5-degree list to starboard. Upon seeing this, he ordered for another all-stop order to the engine room, and Titanic's engines would come to a stop for the final time.
The collision was so gentle that many of the passengers and crew slept through it.
Fireman Barrett was one of the most important pieces of testimony. He talked about standing in boiler room number 6 and seeing water coming in.
Your name is Frederick Barrett?
Yes.
Now just tell us what happened that you saw.
In the stokehold, a red light goes on when the ship's supposed to stop. Well, this red light came on. I'm the man in charge of the watch. I called out, shut all dampers.
What was the next thing that happened?
Well, the crash happened before we had the boat shut.
They were shutting them when the crash came?
Yes.
Where was this crash? What was it you felt or heard or saw?
Water came pouring in, about 2 feet above the stokehold plate.
Can you point to where that is on the ship?
The ship's side was torn from the third stokehold to the forward end.
Barrett was one of the few firemen that managed to escape before the bulkhead doors closed.
Informed of the collision by Captain Smith and told that the damage may indeed be serious. Ismay departed at once for his cabin to dress warmly after hearing this. Fourth Officer Boxhall entered the forward well deck again after finishing his tour of the bow down to F deck, but he now sees a man holding a chunk of ice the size of a small sink basin. He travels over to the starboard bulwark and notices chunks of ice extending 3 to 4.
How strongly you felt the collision depended on where you were in the ship. High up in first class, it's possible George and Mabel Thorne weren't even aware of it. Lower down in second class, Franz Pohlbaum probably noticed some vibration. Third class passengers like Margaret Devaney would have felt the greatest impact. There's only one surviving eyewitness to the actual point of damage, Fireman Frederick Barrett in Boiler Room 6. What Barrett sees will later prove critical to understanding Titanic's sinking.
Numerous compartments are open to the sea and they now begin to flood.
It's not long before they determine that the wound is fatal and the ship is going to founder.
It took less than 60 seconds to seal Titanic's fate. She will hang on for 2 hours and 40 minutes. And then she's gone.
As it passed by the ship, these passengers had returned inside to their drinks and card games afterward. Second-class passenger Lawrence Beasley had left his cabin to investigate the disturbance, but he returned shortly after to continue reading his book. Within a few minutes, he heard passengers walking about the corridors outside wanting to know why the engines had stopped, stating, "Naturally, with such powerful engines as the Titanic carried, the vibration was very noticeable all the time, and the sudden stopping had something of the same effect as the stopping of a loud ticking grandfather's clock in a room." Officer Boxhall has arrived back at the bridge and reported to Captain Smith that he observed no damage in the bow, but that there was indeed ice in the forward well deck. Back down below in the boiler rooms, Fireman Barrett and Engineer Shepard have begun to climb down into Boiler Room 6 after being ordered out of Boiler Room 5, but they notice that it was flooded on the starboard side by about 8 feet. They disregard their order to return to their stations in Room 6 and decide to head back again into Boiler Room 5. Steward Johnston in the first-class dining room on D-deck walks forward to the reception room, and he sees Thomas Andrews heading down the stairs to E-deck before turning aft and heading towards the engine room. Water has now begun to enter the Orlop deck below the mailroom on G-deck. The 5 postal clerks there began to haul mail bags up from the holds. By the time they had hauled all the bags they could up the stairs, the water had risen considerably towards G-deck. Fireman Hendrickson in the bow is told of water coming in at the bottom of the fireman's tunnel. He confirms this and heads to the engine room to inform his fellow engineers. Captain Smith orders for Officer Boxhall to find the carpenter and have him sound the ship. Boxhall leaves immediately, but he runs into Carpenter Hutchinson coming up the crew stairs from A-deck. He has the carpenter report to the bridge after he is told of water flooding the hold below. Boxhall immediately sets off for the mailroom. At around this time, approximately, Officer Boxhall has reached the mailroom on G-deck, and he sees that water is within 2 feet of the top of the stairwell coming from the hold below. After having received word of damage from Carpenter Hutchinson and the mail clerk, Captain Smith sets off for his own tour of the midships, using crew stairwells as to not cause a panic. He first headed down to E-Deck while touring for damage, possibly also heading to personally speak to Chief Engineer Joseph Bell in the engine room.
Let's go now, 15, faster now. Faster.
Steward Johnston in the D-Deck reception room sees Captain Smith descending the stairs, touring the midships for damage, and calming a few passengers as he went. Bosun Haynes has now arrived on the bridge and reports to Chief Officer Wilde that he had observed cargo hold 1 flooding. Wilde responded with, "Get your men up and get the boats out." At around this time, the engine room received word to alert all stokers to go up on deck. Greaser Thomas Ranger in the engine room had been in his station for the past few minutes repairing an electric fan when Chief Electrician Peter Sloan ordered him to go and shut down all of the electric fans, beginning with those located in the boiler rooms. Fireman George Beauchamp continues to dampen the boilers in room 6 when he hears someone yell out, "That will do." He and the others abandon the flooding boiler room and they make their way up to the boat deck via Scotland Road. Bosun Albert Haynes has arrived back in the forecastle head crew quarters, and he orders for all hands stand by. You may be wanted at any moment. The crew in the bow begin to wake, and they ready themselves to receive further orders. Lookout George Simmons heard this order, and he got out of bed for some coffee, but he was disturbed by a strange sound. Upon looking down the shaft for cargo hold 1 like Haynes before him, he saw that the tarp was now removed from the wooden slats, and he could see the ocean water sloshing around in the holds below. Fireman Threlfall in the bow is awoken by someone shouting nearby. Upon getting out of bed, he has to wade through water from his quarters on G-deck and climb the spiral staircase up. He noted that the water was flowing down the stairs into the stokehold tunnel below. Still in the first-class reception room, Steward Johnston observes Thomas Andrews returning from below decks, now heading towards the mailroom. This time, he follows Andrews, and he sees the first-class baggage room on G-deck is now flooding. Johnston returned up the stairs and found Steward Wheat. He told Wheat of the flooding down below before departing for his room to get dressed properly. Steward Wheat then descended the stairs and watched the mailroom flood. First-class passengers Philip Mock and Emma Shapert had dressed and went out onto the A-deck promenade. When they reached the forward end, They spotted third-class passengers in the well deck down below moving their suitcases and belongings out of their cabins. In his quarters on E-deck near the engine room, Steward Nichols overhears engineers passing along orders to shut all the watertight doors. Nichols found himself unable to go back to sleep and remained in his quarters for around 45 minutes after this, talking with his fellow stewards about what was going on. At around this time approximately, Captain Smith had returned to the bridge after his inspection. He gave the orders for the crew to muster the lifeboats and prepare them for passengers should the need arise. This was a preemptive measure by Captain Smith, as he hadn't yet been made aware of the ship's true condition. Back inside, stewards were continuing to try and calm passengers that had awakened by telling them not to worry, and in some instances, they even told passengers that they would be back underway in their voyage soon.
New Greenie's occupied twists help dogs stay calm. Even this one, whose owner tends to...
Out on the boat deck, Seaman Bewley hears Officer Murdoch telling the men to get together and uncover the boats. They were to prepare them quietly, as though nothing had happened, to avoid a panic because passengers by now had begun to roam the upper decks. Officer Boxhall returns to the bridge, and he informs Captain Smith that the mailroom on G-deck was indeed flooding. Smith responded with a terse "all right," and then departed immediately for his own tour of the bow. Officer Wilde orders Quartermaster Oliver to get the muster list for the lifeboats, and he orders Officer Boxhall to wake Officers Lightoller, Pittman, and Lowe and have them come out and help prepare the lifeboats. Steward Wheat, still at the stairs on F-deck watching the mailroom flood, immediately struck out for the watertight doors by the Turkish baths to see if the crew had thought to close them. He noticed that both of the doors were indeed still open, so he began to close them manually by himself. Up in the crow's nest, lookouts Hogg and Evans relieve Fleet and Lee early, since they had been awakened by the collision and subsequent clamoring of crew in the bow. as the water is already too high there. Hendrickson leaves to join Room 5, and he helps in the drawing of boiler fires while Barrett leaves to find more stokers to put the fires out. Lookouts Fleet and Lee arrive under the forecastle head on C deck, and they see firemen coming up from C deck with their kits and clothing. They were saying that there was water beginning to flood their quarters down on F deck. Lookout Lee, like others before him, looked down cargo hold 1, and he saw water rising in the G deck hold below. A bosun then shouted, "All hands to the boat deck," and the crew began to evacuate the bow. Norman Chambers spotted 3 men who he assumed to be officers inspecting the flooding mailroom and first-class baggage room. The water was within 2 feet of F deck, and he overheard one of the officers remark, "Doesn't appear to be rising that much." Saloon steward William Ward is awoken and hears third-class passengers traveling along Scotland Road outside of his door. After peeking his head out, he noted that passengers were walking aft with lifebelts in hand. Some of them were even carrying chunks of ice. He thought it was odd, but he still had faith in the ship, so he returned to his bunk. Out on the top deck in the officers' quarters, Officer Boxhall has relayed information about the collision to Officer Pittman. He's attempted to wake Officer Lowe, who instead went back to sleep, and then he approaches Lightoller's cabin. After telling Lightoller that they had struck an iceberg and that the mailroom was flooding on G-Deck, Lightoller hurriedly got out of bed and started to dress himself. Bedroom steward Thiesinger passes the stairwell to the mailroom, and he observes water flooding the area. Steward Dodd sees him nearby and yells, "All stewards, call your people and warn them to go on deck." From his cabin after getting dressed. He's on the port side, forward section of the boat deck. He spots Chief Officer Wilde nearby and asked if all the hands had been called, which Wilde replied that they had. Lightoller noted that none of the canvas covers have been removed off of the regular lifeboats nearby on the port side yet. Passenger Alfred Nerney had been outside and saw ice in the forward well deck. He immediately traveled to the lowest point of the ship available to first-class passengers, the squash court. When he arrives, he is stunned to find 3 to 6 feet of water in the room.
Choose your wild this summer at Busch Gardens Tampa Bay. Get closer than ever at our...
Boxhall arrives on the boat deck after rousing the officers in the deck house. He sets to work with the men on the port side, getting the lifeboat covers off of the boats and preparing them to be cranked out. Third Officer Pittman joins everyone else on the boat deck, and he takes note of the situation with the lifeboats. He sees Officer Mooney nearby, who tells him that ice has been found in the forward well deck. Pittman then leaves to investigate and evacuate any remaining crew on the bow. On E-deck with Chief Purser Hugh McElroy. preemptively begin to tell passengers in their care to dress warmly, put on your life belts, and go up on deck. The saloon steward quarters on E-deck, Fred Ray was just starting to get back to sleep when a steward entered the room and ordered everyone to get up and send the passengers up to the boat deck. By the staircase to the mailroom. Captain Smith and Thomas Andrews had just left the stairwell, and she overheard Andrews telling Smith, "Well, 3 have gone already, Captain." This was most likely a reference to the amount of flooded compartments that Andrews had observed. Captain Smith left Andrews to his inspection, and he headed back to the bridge to oversee the lifeboat preparations. Have now begun to be uncovered, so he sets out and helping to assist their preparation. Passengers Charles and Annie Stingle have been walking the boat deck when they decide it's time to return in. Charles then sees Captain Smith nearby, coming up a set of stairs with a very serious and grave face. Countess of Roths and Gladys Cherry have been up on deck for a short while, and had just begun they saw Captain Smith too.
The exact nature of the damage will never be known, but eyewitnesses are very clear.
There were 2 very long, detailed inquiries. People saw water coming in along the starboard side, and they were quite clearly able to work out what had gone wrong in that section of the ship.
But was that the only damage? Buried in the 1912 inquiries, There is other evidence which points to a mystery that has never been solved. An hour and 40 minutes after the collision, water is coming into boiler room number 4, not from the side, but from underneath, up through the floor. Could this mean there was bottom damage?
Now, boiler room number 4 was not damaged by the side damage from the iceberg. Therefore, that could indicate that there was additional damage beneath the double bottom.
Was Titanic's double bottom damaged as well? The mystery remains unsolved. But either way, she is already doomed. Few on board realize it, but Titanic is barely 2 hours too late.
Climbing the grand staircase to do the same. Steward Wheat was just coming up the grand staircase and saw Purser McElroy up above. Wheat heard an order from the purser: "Get the men up and get all the lifebelts and all the passengers." Wheat then began to go back below and wake up the stewards. Down below, Edwin Kimball and his wife had already dressed and exited their cabin when a young lady of our party came back from the upper deck, and we asked her what was going on up there. She said the order had been given to put on lifebelts. None of us knew how to put on lifebelts, but I saw an officer in the companionway and he showed us how to put it on, telling us that there was no danger and that everyone would be all right. Colonel Archibald Gracie had returned to his cabin to dress warmly. As he came into the first-class entrance, he spotted Bruce Ismay standing with an officer. He again noted that Ismay was smiling at the passengers, but surmised that he was putting on a brave face for them.
You there? Are you the designer of the ship?
Captain Smith gives
Yes,
the
I
official
am.
order for the boats to be
All
swung
right.
out and
Go
for
and inspect the
passengers to be called
damage.
up with their
Yes,
lifebelts
sir.
on.
All right, let's
Crews
go
from
inspect
nearby
the
lifeboat
damage.
stations began to prepare to swing the boats out, while others departed to relay Smith's orders to the aft boat stations. Captain Smith then departed for the Marconi wireless room. He told the operators that the ship had struck an iceberg and get ready to send out a call for assistance, but don't send it until I tell you. This is most likely because Smith was still waiting for a confirmation that the ship was going to sink before asking the Marconi operators to call for assistance. After receiving the official order, lifeboats began to be swung out on the boat deck. Typically, the forward boats were swung out before the stern boats after. The process for uncovering the boats, preparing them, and then cranking them out generally took about 5 to 10 minutes per boat. Down below in the saloon steward's quarters on E-deck adjacent to Scotland Road, Steward Frederick Ray had just begun to get back to sleep after the noise of third-class passengers traveling down the corridor had died down. Suddenly an order rang out from a saloon steward nearby for everyone to get up, get dressed, and head to their lifeboat stations. And another nearby steward, William Ward, recalled thinking that even though they were being ordered to the lifeboat stations, there wasn't anything significantly wrong with the ship.
Cheez-It crackers are a past, present, and will always be my go-to snack.
Nauseous? Ooh, and in the middle of the road, too. That's a lot of excuse me's.
At this approximate time, the band has gathered at the first-class entrance forward on A deck and began to play music. It is still debated on what time they moved up and out onto the boat deck. In the first-class lounge, passengers have started gathering after returning inside from the cold. Edith Rosenbaum stated, "The lounge filled with passengers in various stages of undress, many of them indignant at being routed out of bed after midnight. I listened to Colonel Washington Roebling, founder of the Brooklyn Bridge. Whatever the trouble is, I doubt there's any real emergency. The Titanic has 15 watertight bulkheads, which makes sure the lid might slow it down a few knots, but it wouldn't do much more than that."
treat our pets like we treat ourselves.
To the boat as well. Thomas Andrews arrives on the bridge around this time and informs Captain Smith that the incoming water is too much for Titanic to withstand. The pumps, when activated, will not be able to keep up with the flooding. He gives Titanic an hour to an hour and a half to survive.
Captain, I expected damage. How is it? It's very bad. Several compartments are being flooded. Ship will sink. She cannot sink. She's unsinkable.
Captain Smith officially gives the order to begin loading all lifeboats with women and children. Seaman Poindexter arrives on the boat deck.
Too many watertight compartments are being flooded. The ship will sink.
Thomas Andrews, after conversing with Captain Smith, marched back inside the ship to assist in getting passengers on deck. After giving the order to load the boats, Captain Smith immediately left for the Marconi wireless room. He told the operators, "Send the call for assistance." Phillips responded with, "What call should I send?" Smith said, "The regulation call for help. Just that." Officer Boxhall on deck hears someone remark about a light on the horizon off the port bow. He turns and confirms the light. He then sees Captain Smith nearby and asks him, "Should I send a distress signal?" Smith confirms to Boxhall that he had already sent one via the wireless. Boxhall then deduces that their transmitted position over the wireless is incorrect, as it had been determined via the 8 o'clock dead reckoning. Titanic by now was approximately 20 miles ahead of the 8 o'clock DR. Boxhall left for the chart room to plot their actual position for an amended wireless transmission.
Titanic, CQD, CQD, MGY, MGY, 41, position, 40, 44, north, 50, 24, west.
Down in third class, stewards have begun to try and organize crowds gathering
Again,
in the stern of the ship.
CQD, CQD, CQD. This is Titanic. CQD, CQD, MGY.
They had all been waiting around for someone to tell them what to do and where to go. Mostly in the third class general room and other third class areas. Thomas Andrews sees to it that on C deck, Steward Etches makes sure that all the passengers had left for the boat deck before ordering him to open all the cabin doors, take out all the life belts. Opening the doors was to make sure that everyone had left and to let others know that the room had already been checked. If Etches were to find any passengers, he was instructed to assist them in any way necessary to get them up on the deck. Third class steward Hart begins to assemble a group of around 30 women and children from third class in the stern. Shortly after assembling this group, he would begin to lead them up to the boat deck toward the lifeboats. Other third-class passengers in the stern would stay where they were, or begin to move out into the aft well deck shortly after. From here, they would have direct access to the B-deck promenade, but the third-class passengers remained in the aft well deck for the time being.
Cat, until she tried Sheba, ignored to adored.
Officer Lowe finally wakes in his cabin, in the officers' quarters out on deck, due to the growing noise in the corridors. When he steps out of his door, he sees that women and children are waiting in the officers' quarters hallway with their lifebelts on. He hurriedly dresses and rushes out to the port boat deck to assist preparing the lifeboats with others. Lowe is informed of the collision by an officer, and he goes back to his cabin to retrieve his personal revolver. He then makes his way to the starboard boat deck and assists Officer Murdoch with the preparation of Boat 7 for loading and launch. After roaming all over the boat deck, overseeing the lifeboat readiness drills, Officer Lightoller approaches Captain Smith to get permission to swing the boats out. Smith answered in the affirmative, and then the port side boats began to be swung out.
It really was the perfect day. But the little things made it even better. The card has preferred for a reason. Chase Sapphire Preferred.
President Feta cheese. So fresh. So creamy.
On the starboard side, Officer Murdoch is asking for women and children to please step forward and join the lifeboat stations 3, 5, 7. He was not ordering passengers to enter the boats, neither were the other officers at other lifeboat stations. They would ask for volunteers to join the boats, in order to avoid a panic breaking out amongst the passengers. Whenever there were no more willing passengers in the nearby vicinity, the boats would then be launched. By now, Officer Boxhall has completed his calculation of the ship's position via the new dead reckoning. He gives this position to Captain Smith, who in turn hands it back to him and tells him to deliver it to the wireless room. Boxhall arrives at the wireless room but cannot communicate with Jack Phillips and Harold Bride due to the overwhelming steam noise ahead. Verbal communication attempts are abandoned, and Boxhall writes down the new distress coordinates and then leaves to return to the boat deck. Jack Phillips takes note of the piece of paper and amends his wireless signals to broadcast the new coordinates given out by Boxhall: 41 by 46 degrees north, 50 by 14 degrees west. Officer Lightoller came to Smith after the port boats had been swung out and cupped his hands over Smith's ears and shouted over the steam noise, "Hadn't we better get the women and children into the boat, sir?" Smith nodded, "Yes. Put the women and children in and lower away." Etches is helping to clear ropes on deck near Boat 7 when he notices Benjamin Guggenheim and his valet in formal attire, helping usher women into Boats 5 and 7. Etches inquired why they didn't have lifebelts on, and Guggenheim responded, "We've dressed up in our best and are prepared to go down like gentlemen. If anything should happen to me, tell my wife in New York that I've done my best in doing my duty. No woman was left on board this ship because Ben Guggenheim was a coward."
This family has been filling and filling their mill food recycler for a week now.
On the starboard boat deck, First Officer Murdoch has ran out of willing passengers to board Boat 7. He tells the crew to row a short distance away, but stand by the after gangways to receive more passengers later on. Murdoch places Lookout Hogg in charge of Boat 7 and turns to the crew on deck, signaling that the lowering process was about to begin. On the port side, Officer Lightoller has Boat 4 tied to a heavy coaling wire that ran alongside the A-deck promenade in case the ship developed a list or something. He then orders 2 or 3 stewards to find hand cranks to open the windows on the A-deck promenade so the passengers could enter the boats. There is a general confusion in part of the officers and passengers about where they were to join the boats. The normal method would be for the boats to be lowered down.
In the immediate aftermath of Titanic's collision with the iceberg, it became clear that something was horribly wrong, but the realization wasn't quick. For the ship's crew and designers, it took some time to gauge what was actually happening, and slowly the clues began to come in. At the forepeak, the very front of the ship, a hissing noise was heard that indicated that air was being pushed out of a vent from somewhere deep within the ship, and only water could be the thing pushing the air out. Elsewhere, covers over cargo hatches began to bulge outwards because of that same effect. After some 45 minutes, the situation had become clear. Titanic was sinking. She was going down slowly, but she would definitely sink.
Passengers still on the starboard boat
For 2 hours or so, the ship had settled slowly in the water. It was so gradual that it tricked people into a false sense of security.
Of the crowd of willing passengers, only 2 women refused to enter this boat. The other passengers had
Ladies and gentlemen, please step forward now. Thank you. For the time being, I will require women and children only. Gentlemen, please hold back. Thank you.
Everybody thought the ship couldn't sink. That myth had spread through word of mouth and was even being pushed by the ship's officers and builders on board. But it was only after some of the early lifeboats were lowered and sent away with reluctant, maybe even cynical occupants that they noticed the ship was sitting lower by the head in the water, and it only got worse. For the next hour or so, the ship's boats were filled and lowered, and things had started off calmly. But by the end, when the feeling of the ship sinking underfoot could no longer be ignored, human drama began to play out, and panic settled in. By 2:10 in the morning, the ship's bow was underwater, and the last
to be separated at Boat 8. Ida insists upon her maid taking her place in the lifeboat. The 2 retire back inside the ship. After standing by and waiting for the A-deck promenade windows to be unlocked, Officer Lightoller then moves to lifeboat stations 6 and 8 and begins to fill both of them at the same time. Boat 4 will remain stationary outside of the A-deck promenade, locked behind a pane of glass for an hour before the passengers can board it. Officer Lowe is working the falls for Boat 5 when he notices a man step forward and wave his arm, shouting, "Lower away, lower away, lower away." Officer Lowe recognizes the man as Bruce Lizard, chairman of White Star Line. He stalls him, his face steps back and begins to unload Boat 3 with women and children. Steward Wheat leaves the boat deck to evacuate any remaining crew midshipman and steward Etches climb out of boat 5 and back onto the boat deck, but Officer Murdoch orders both of them back into the boat. Murdoch states, "You can return to this boat, old man, and also look after the others. Keep handy to come to the after gateway when hailing. Goodbye, good luck." Murdoch then moved to the boat 3 station to take charge of its loading. Edward climbed back aboard boat 5 and departed away. Boat 36 of its 65 seats taken. Both people would join the boat momentarily. 2 would jump in as the lowering started. Boat 5, once it was free of the Titanic, would tie up alongside Boat 7 after both had launched and rowed away. Officer Bonesall, with the aid of some binoculars, begins to observe the light on the horizon that he had spotted earlier. Upon focusing on the light, he determines that it's actually the 2 masthead lights of a steamer in the distance. Bonesall immediately stepped over to the Morse key on the starboard bulwark of the bridge and begins to attempt to contact the steamer. Captain Smith nearby notices Bonesall's attempt. It tells him, "Tell them to come at once. There's some
Respectable must-haves, even their locker can be as big as their vibe.
Walmart?
you thinking." During its descent, Boat 5 begins to dip at an angle towards the bow of Titanic, and lowering is momentarily halted until the boat is evenly trimmed out. While the crew work to level the boat, many women on board begin to call out for their husbands and sons on the lower deck. Hearing this, an officer yells out, "Let the men in, make haste!" And a few men are allowed entry into the boat. The lowering continues. Captain Smith orders for lamp trimmer Hemming to make sure that the boats were provided with lights. Hemming goes below decks and begins bringing them up 4 at a time from the lighthouse on the boat deck. trails of rockets were reportedly so bright that they bathed the Titanic's decks in full light for a few seconds before fading away. Quartermasters brightened the road on the stern, seeing the rocket explode overhead. They look over the side of the stern, they see a lifeboat, 7 in the ocean, and they form a bridge. They're told to gather the extra detonators and report to the bridge immediately. Steward Fred Ray in Scotland Road on the E-deck sees water now up to the second funnel casing. He climbs the stairs and begins to make his way to the boat deck.
Titanic, this is Carpathia. Do you know the other ship is calling you? Come at once, Struckerberg. It's a CQD. Shall I tell my captain? Do you require assistance? Yes, sir. I need your position, please. Position 41, 44, 50, 24 west.
Reaches the water,
all right,
but the
thank
falls
you.
are not released on time. A quartermaster orders to passengers to release the falls leading to the trigger. After this, the oars are brought on and 5 more begins to roll away from the Titanic.
Nobody ever thought the ship was going down.
They did not believe the ship was hurt in any way.
Again and again.
Bride alerts Captain Smith that the RMS Carpathia is en route. Her arrival time is 4 hours.
Nobody ever thought the ship was going down.
They did not believe the ship was hurt in any way.
Again and again, it was repeated, this ship cannot sink.
There were a lot of ladies and gentlemen that were just treating it as a kind of a joke.
My husband joked with some of the women he knew, and I heard him say, "Don't you hear the band playing?"
In Boiler Room 5, the team assembled by Fireman Barrett finally finishes drawing the fires in the boilers. Most of the stokers depart, but Barrett and 2 engineers stay behind in the now abandoned boiler room. After having seen his wife off in boat number 3, climbs over but falls into the boat. Officer Murdoch remarks that this is the funniest thing he's seen all night. In the Marconi wireless room, Junior Operator Bride jokingly suggests to Operator Phillips to begin sending out the new SOS signal, saying it might be your last chance to use it. On the forward port side boat deck, Officer Lightoller is trying to persuade passengers to join boat 6 as Captain Smith, Officer Wilde, and other crewmen are ushering women and children into boat 8. Passenger Emma Bucknell recalls while near boat 8 that men were beginning to grow desperate as only the women and children were being allowed Boat 1 is lowered away after all nearby passengers willing to enter the boat have done so. In total, only 12 of its 40 seats were taken, 5 by passengers and 7 by crew members to control the boat. Lowering would be halted momentarily on A deck due to it getting snagged by the coaling wire. On the forward port side, Officer Lightoller is short on crewmen after having sent 7 below deck to open the gangway doors. He can only afford to have 1 crewman per boat.
Come on, guys, keep lowering away.
It was also told to row for the light on the horizon, offload its passengers, and then come back. Ultimately, Boat 6 would meet up with Lifeboat 16 after launching, and a transfer of crew would take place, as Boat 6 had been launched undermanned. Passengers in Boat 6 noticed that the initial 5-degree list to starboard had lessened some, but they still had to reach out and push their lifeboat away from Titanic's hull at times as they were being lowered. In Boiler Room 5, Fireman Barrett rushes to climb the escape ladder.
Hold it right there. What's the matter? We don't have any more sailor. We need more sailor. Are you a sailor? I'm a yachtsman. All right, please hop into the boat now.
Once Barrett reached E-deck, he saw water making its way up Scotland Road from the bow, and immediately departed for the boat deck. Officer Lightoller, along with Officer Wilde, Captain Smith, and Officer Murdoch, headed to Murdoch's cabin, where he opened a locker of Webley revolvers. Lightoller turned to leave, but as he approached the door, Wilde shoved a revolver in his hand along with some ammunition, saying, "Here you are. You might need it." Lightoller shoved the items into his coat pocket and departed back for the boat deck, when he heard Wilde remark, "I'm going to put on my lifebelt." Lightoller then went to retrieve his own lifebelt while he was still inside.
This is my all-time favorite snack. They were a staple in my house. Cheesy crackers or a past.
agree to this and then set about trying to help load the boats. Trimmer Cavill climbs the escape ladder from Boiler Room 4 after seeing water begin to come up from the stokehold plate, or the floor. Stewardess Violet Jessup boards Lifeboat 16. As she takes her place in the boat, Officer Moody turns and hands her a bundle, which she realizes is not food, but someone's infant child. Lookout George Simmons in Boat 1 notices as they pull away from Titanic that the liner had now sunk considerably down by the head. The portholes under Titanic to the starboard aft section after helping to load Lifeboat 12. He begins to help Officer Murdoch load Lifeboat 9. To the crew on deck, gives the order to lower away. Boat 14 is then lowered, the with 65 seats taken. Down below, Trevor Cowan decided to re-enter the abandoned boiler room. He noted that the room was beginning to fill without vibration, so he set off for boats 13 and 15 on the boat deck.
Fiber-powered internet. We deliver commitment with every connection. Spectrum Business.
Harbor Freight has the automotive maintenance and repair essentials you need.
Madam repairs may recall it. These English, how brave, how calm, how beautiful. I, a patriotic Frenchwoman, say that I can never forget that group of Englishmen. Every one of them perfect gentlemen, calmly puffing cigarettes and cigars and watching the little children being placed into the boats. My last sight of the upper decks was still one of those Englishmen. To her and Simmons, they say death so bravely that it was almost terrible. Officer Murdoch has Boat 13 lowered to the A-deck promenade to receive women and children. Portable suction pipe in Boiler Room 4 is finally connected to the bilge system, and it begins to discharge water out of Titanic's condenser openings between lifeboats number 11 and 13. Meanwhile, on the port side, Boat 12 has been loaded and ready to lower for 5 minutes, but the process was halted in order to lower Boat 14. It is finally lowered away after Boat 14 is safely away from A-deck. As Boat 12 is lowered, a man jumps from the boat deck and lands in the lifeboat. Boat 12 was lowered with 42 of its 65 seats taken. Side at around the same time that Boat 12 was being lowered, Boat 9 was also lowered with 40 of its 65 seats taken. Boat 15 on the starboard side is also lowered to the A-deck promenade to receive more women and children. Crew on board began to notice a slight list to port as it was lowered down. children at first.
When I check in with my body, I know Ocrevescinovo is the right choice for me.
If I were him, I'd bundle my home and auto and pick up the real victory. Savings.
At this time, Fireman Barrett finally arrives on A-Deck Promenade, near boats 13 and 15. He climbs aboard boat 13 and noted that only 3 others joined the boat after he did. Up on the boat deck, second-class passenger Lawrence Beasley hears a call from the boats down below, asking him, are there any more ladies around? He responded that there wasn't, and the crew told him, well, then you better make a jump for it. 2 ladies would join the boat from A-Deck after Beasley jumped down into the boat, followed by a father, a wife, and an infant child. Boat 13 is lowered away with approximately 55 of its 65 seats taken. Officer Murdoch leaves the starboard boat deck and moves over to the port side to assist in the loading there with the large crowd. Fireman Barrett on board boat 13 hears someone shout, "Don't let anyone else in that boat. The falls will break," after a kitchen clerk, Paul Mogg, jumps into the boat once it starts to lower. Boat 15 is lowered with 68 of its 65 seats taken. The passengers and crew on board boat 15 notice that the port list is continuing to grow as the side of their lifeboat begins to rub alongside the Titanic's hull during their descent. This would cause the boat to be damaged or even break from bumping along the thousands of rivets along the Titanic's side. They make attempts to push the boat away from the hull when needed. A man jumps down from the boat deck and lands on a woman in boat 15. He breaks several of her ribs. Captain Smith returns to the Marconi wireless room, and he informs the operators that Titanic was not going to last much longer. The engine rooms were taking on water and the dynamos might not last. It is currently not known where Captain Smith received this information, as the engine room at this time was still dry. He may have been estimating the amount of flooding when delivering this report. In Lifeboat 5, Third Officer Pittman noted that the last row of portholes under the forecastle head were beginning to submerge into the sea. on deck for himself to see what was going on. He turns the command of the apparatus over to junior operator Harold Bride. Having just received word about the going on of the ship from Captain Smith, Harold Bride sat down at the Marconi key and began immediately sending out distress signals. Captain Smith notices that boat 2 is about to lower, and he orders for Officer Boxhall to abandon his Morse lamp attempts to hail the steamer on the horizon and to take control of the lifeboat. On A-deck promenade near boat 4, the crew have finally found the cracks in the lifeboats, allowing passengers to finally begin loading the lifeboat. The rigging wire it had been attached to was cut, and it swung away from the hull a short distance due to the port list. Deck chairs were used quickly as a bridge for passengers to crawl into the boat. Lifeboat number 2 is lowered with 24 of its 40 seats taken. In the aft port lifeboat sections, crew helping to load boat 10 note that the port list is still continuing to grow, causing the lifeboat to swing 2 to 2.5 feet away from the boat deck. Chief Baker Charles Jofflin is near boat 10 and is tossing children into it overhead. Jofflin made a note that most of the passengers in the nearby vicinity now were of third class.
When you dare to challenge your rhythm, your world might start to feel a whole lot groovier. Rhythm Heaven Groove, available now on Nintendo Switch.
Working with Luis Suarez, how was it?
I don't think he's ever seen a cheese board before. Ta-da!
As boat number 11 reaches the water, the officers have trouble disengaging the falls so that they can row away. The discharge of water from the bilge system directly behind them causes a slight panic to break out amongst the passengers on board. When the falls are finally released and boat 11 begins to row away, many on board fear that they will be pulled down by the suction forces when Titanic sank. had come round to the starboard side, apparently to the after gangway doors, as Murdoch had mentioned to boats 7 and 5 earlier in the sinking. Vauxhall complies with this order and begins to row his boat aft around the stern of Titanic. In boat number 6, Quartermaster Hitchens hears the same order from Captain Smith, but flatly refuses to return. When the passengers on board object, he shouts, "We are not going back to the boat. It's our lives now, not theirs."
Come back for the ship. Boat number 6, please return to the ship. No, we're not going back. It is our lives, not theirs. Now row.
Because the strain of the falls is making it impossible for them to release them. Occupants of boat 15 also begin shouting for the crew up above to stop lowering their boat, but it continues to be lowered. On board boat 13, Fireman Barrett and another man climb over the passengers to frantically cut the fall lines with a knife and free the boat. They manage to begin rowing away just as the bottom of boat 15 touches their outstretched hands.
Titanic, calling Carpathia. Are you guys coming? Yes, we are. All right, please hurry up. Engine room is flooded, filling up to the boilers.
Boat 4 reaches the ocean, but the falls have to be cut with a knife. A seaman shouts up that they need assistance in the boat, and Lightoller sends Quartermaster Purkis and another sailor down to join them. Purkis would take charge of the boat as they began rowing away. First-class passenger Emily Ryerson in boat 4 noted that she was shocked by how far down the ship had sunk when her boat finally reached the ocean. She quickly noted that A-deck was only 20 feet or so from the water, and that she could see water pouring into open portholes at the waterline on C-deck as they began to pull away. At around this time approximately, Officer Lightoller is reported by some sources to have removed a group of male passengers from Boat D with a revolver. The remaining crew on the boat deck form a line and interlock their arms together to prevent men from swamping the lifeboat. As boat 15 begins to pull away, Steward Nichols on board noted that Titanic's starboard propeller was halfway above the waterline. Around this time, Captain Smith entered the wireless cabin for the final time, stating, "You can do no more. Look out for yourselves." Smith left the room and returned to the boat deck. Junior Operator Bride makes to leave, but stops when he sees Phillips still as if in a trance, pounding out wireless signals in vain. Officer Murdoch has a hard time finding passengers to board Boat C because the passengers are primarily in the stern and on the port side of the ship. But he has managed to fit 42 people into the lifeboat built for 40. Murdoch stands at the ready and calls one more time for anyone else willing to join to get in. White Star Line chairman Bruce Ismay is nearby and climbs aboard, becoming the last occupant of Boat C. Murdoch turns, acknowledges this, and then gives the order to lower away. Boat C is lowered with 43 of its 40 seats taken.
Please, Ida, get to the boat. No, we've been living together for many years. Where you go, I go. Please don't argue.
Hey, Alex, what's up?
Hello, welcome. Come on in.
hands and tell them that they were abandoning the ship, but he turned to Operator Bride after several seconds and noted that there were no replies. Perhaps an attempt to move as much weight to the starboard side of the ship as possible and prevent her from listing any further to port.
All passengers, please head on over the starboard side. Straighten up the ship. Again, all passengers, please head over the starboard side. Straighten up the ship. Once again, all passengers, please head on over the starboard side. Straighten up the ship. Thank you.
Which still had not been opened at this time. Quartermaster Rowe, Boat C, noted that Titanic had went down significantly during their descent. After loading as many women and children nearby that they could into Boat D, an officer boards and prepares to lower away. Boat D is the final successful launch lifeboat of Titanic, with 20 of its 40 seats taken. As Boat D passes by A deck, the rear fall becomes jammed. The boat settles in the water by the bow, while the crew work to get the aft fall to lower. As the boat sits there, 2 passengers jump from the A deck promenade and join the boat. As they do this, the water is beginning to come over the A deck bulwark and flood the area. Shortly after beginning to lower Boat D, Officer Lightoller takes a look down the crew's stairwell just abaft the bridge and sees water on B deck, and it is rapidly rushing up the stairs to A deck. Lightoller climbs onto the roof of the officers' quarters to release collapsible B. Murdoch does the same on the starboard side for collapsible A. Second-class passengers Father Thomas Biles and Father Joseph Perschwitz stand together on the aft end of the boat deck, and they begin granting absolution to the remaining passengers.
Inside RX Bar. What's inside matters. RX Bar. No BS.
Empower.
So handsome.
I can't buy this.
Whoa. Your Empower investment accounts are designed for the long. Coffee works hard, but Crest works harder. With just one kit of Crest 3D white strips,
Collapsible A is released from the roof of the officer's quarters. Due to the poor list and falls they were, it became wedged, and they could not get into Collapsible B is released from the roof of the officers' quarters on the port side, but it lands upside down on the boat deck. Junior operator Harold Bride is trapped underneath it as the water begins to wash over the deck. The movements of Boat B after this are quite suspicious, as it somehow would end up on the starboard side of the ship.
Abandoned ship. It's every man for themselves.
The waiting crowd of passengers near Boat A abandon hope of climbing aboard, and they begin running towards the stern as they see water coming over the bridge wing. On the roof of the officers' quarters, Officer Lightoller, after freeing Collapsible B, crosses over to the starboard side and observes Murdoch and his crew attempting to free Collapsible A from the funnel wire. Lightoller then strolls forward before diving off the front of the bridge. Titanic takes a sharp dip down, rights herself, then dips again, and the result is a wave that washes itself over the deck as Titanic continues to pick up speed in her descent.
To feel a whole lot groovier. Rhythm Heaven Groove, available now on Nintendo Switch.
With Walmart Plus Assist, if you qualify for government assistance, you get 50% off membership. I know, free same-day
Many passengers describe hearing a building noise coming from Titanic as broken china and distant booms and thuds. Due to the severe angle, the ship's keel begins to fail below the third funnel. This begins a chain reaction of small stress cracks forming in the hull and deck plating inside the ship as it continues to rise. Titanic's power suddenly fails, plunging the ship and everyone around it into darkness. There are some reports that the emergency lighting continued to stay on at this time, but the overwhelming majority of those on the boats stated that the ship went completely black. After reaching a high angle, the ship's keel fully fails, and the ship breaks. The stern remained afloat, by some estimates, for up to a full 5 minutes before sinking again. Past the watertight doors and bulkheads due to the hull being ripped away from the inner deck structure during the break. Passengers in the boats and a few survivors on board stated that the stern sank down by the head before reaching a vertical or near vertical angle before stopping for a few moments.
At 2:20 a.m., April 15, 1912, RMS Titanic sinks beneath the waters of the North Atlantic Ocean. Alright guys, and that is it for this video today. Hope you guys enjoyed this one. Make sure to hit the like, subscribe button. See my future video. See you guys next time. Bye-bye.